This is not for you. Yes, they can, and I'm going to explain why. The two authors we're going to look at in this video today are H.P. Lovecraft and Mark Z. Danielewski. Lovecraft lived from 1890 to 1937, and he published exclusively short stories and novellas in cheesy pulp fiction magazines. He didn't even have any real books bound together that were published during his lifetime. His work makes up a kind of genre that I would identify as this existential horror fantasy, or as he called them, weird tales. He envisioned himself as being this successor to Edgar Allan Poe, and it really comes through in his literary style. If you wonder to yourself, why is it that you don't read someone like Lovecraft in school, it's because he is a tremendous visionary, an outstanding writer, but also a very flawed one at that. But I think those flaws actually, in a way, accent his broader message, what he's trying to do with the fiction itself. Let me explain. He very rarely wrote in the third person. Almost all of the stuff that he writes is in the first person. Women, they're like non-existent in his works. Yeah, there's a few, but their perspective is kind of irrelevant. As a matter of fact, the perspective, the characteristics of human beings is of a lot less relevance in his work than you'd find in almost any kind of contemporary fiction. His characters are interchangeable. They're about facilitating the storyline. It is estimated that in his entire oeuvre, oh, that's such a great word, it's French, it means an artist's body of work, he probably had only about 5,000 published words of dialogue. The rest of it is the narration and thoughts and expressions of the characters and their actions. It's fascinating. But when he wrote dialogue, it was god-awful. His entire body of work is based on the central assumption that the universe is much more chaotic, much less reasonable, much less dependable, less trustworthy than you could even imagine. Here, as he puts it in the beautiful first paragraph of perhaps one of his most famous stories, the Call of Cthulhu. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity. And it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But some day the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open us up with such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightening position therein, that we shall either go mad from revelation or flee from the deadly light in the peace and safety of a new dark age. That is it. Lovecraft figured out that the biggest fear is not the fear of death, it's the fear of going mad. And that's what happens to a great number of the characters in his stories. They are normal people living in this normal content world of theirs, and then they start finding the cracks in reality, where terrible beasts, monsters, these old gods called the Old Ones. But the Old Ones aren't gods in the sense that they're, these spiritual, immaterial things you can pray to and get stuff back. They're basically extraterrestrials with sorts of powers and abilities and histories that are so beyond this, that are so difficult to describe, that when we come into contact with them, our world is so irrevocably disrupted that we can never go back to who we were before. And you're probably going to get eaten too, so there is a fear of death involved, but nothing is safe. It's not like in a lot of slasher movies where the slasher can die at the end and everyone can, go to a therapist afterward and continue on with their lives. No. The universe, it doesn't hate us, but it does not care about us. We are just merely the playthings of forces so much beyond our imagination. And that's what I think Lovecraft did that was so cool, is he was an atheist. He was a hardcore atheist. And he addressed the question of, how do you make something scary if you don't believe in devils or mermaids, or, well, I guess mermen are scarier, werewolves, all that kind of like supernatural stuff. It's not that you invent things that are supernatural, it's you get people to stop believing in the order of the natural world. He took the floor and dropped it below us. We are so much more alone than you could even imagine. His writing is so over the top. It really is. It's a kind of writing that you just don't see that much anymore. It's flowery, it's overly descriptive. His characters are, since it's oftentimes in the first person, it's men that are usually people affiliated with universities or are educated, and they're trying to rationalize and come to terms and trying to explain what is fundamentally unexplainable. That's why he never goes into great detail explaining what these creatures and things look like, what the old ones, the outer ones, the Cthulhus and other sorts of stuff that I can't even pronounce look like, because even though he does give vague descriptions, you just can't account for the sheer horror, the kind of madness that overcomes these people. That's scary. It is. Books don't necessarily have the same ability as movies to just pop out and startle you, but what they can do is they can creep inside of you, make you question things. It's subtle, but books are allowed to do that in ways that movies can't. But somebody that took that core concept of what Lovecraft was working on, the idea that the real horror is the fear of going mad. This did it. House of Leaves, Mark Z. Danielewski. Wow. I don't know how I discovered this book, but discovering this book changed everything. This is warped, and it is awesome. This scared me. I actually had to put this book down because I was scared. The ability to do something like that is nothing short of magic. See, Danielewski goes one step beyond Lovecraft. While Lovecraft was all about having narrators that are grappling with just the pure insanity of the universe and having all these crazy events happen and not being able to frame it and put it all into logical sense, Danielewski goes to the point of making the text itself not make sense. In a good way. Believe me, this isn't like James Joyce stuff. No offense, James Joyce. So Danielewski wrote House of Leaves, but House of Leaves is a frame story. Let me explain. See, there is in House of Leaves Johnny Truant, who writes the introduction and the notes of a manuscript called the Nevelson Record, which is written by Zampano. All the writing that's in Courier font, the typewriter font, is the technical name for it, is that which is written by Johnny Truant. The idea is that Johnny Truant found a manuscript written by this elderly man that lived by him in the apartment complex but has since died, of an extremely long essay called the Nevelson Record, which is about a film called The Nevelson Record, which is a documentary about a couple whose house has a secret passageway in it that appears overnight that makes the house bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. People get lost inside of this secret passageway, and they can't get out. It's dark, it's a black abyss, and it's scary as hell. So, this, the essay part, the essay of the Nevelson Record, has all these footnotes in it that are all cited properly, even though a lot of these sources don't even exist. But then Johnny Truant adds his own notes, which are also footnotes, which are written here, and sometimes, a lot, the footnotes end up taking more and more of the page,
And Johnny Truant starts telling aspects of his own life into this story. Johnny Truant's story becomes more and more warped as he reads more of the Nevelson record. There's a fundamental interplay between these two texts, and it gets creepy. I don't want to spoil too much, but you have to read this because the text starts warping around to what's going on in the story, and it is simply haunting.
Let me read a passage that I found extremely effective. I'm no longer alone. Impossible, not impossible. This time it's human. Maybe not. Extremely long fingers. A sucking sound, too, sucking on its teeth. Teeth already torn from the gums. I don't know how I know this, but it's already too late. I've seen the eyes. They have no whites. I haven't seen this. The way they glisten red. Then it begins reaching for me, slowly unfolding itself out of the corner. Mad meat, all of it, but I understand. These eyes are full of blood. Except, I'm only looking at the shadows and shelves. Of course I'm alone. And then behind me, the door closes. The rest is in pieces. A scream, a howl, a roar, all warping or splintering. That makes no sense. Everything falls apart. Stories heard but not recalled, letters too, words filling my head, fragmenting like artillery shells, shrapnel-like syllables flying everywhere, terrible syllables, sharp, cracked, traveling at murderous speeds, tearing all through it in a very, very bad, perhaps even irreparable way. Known, some, call, is, am? Incoherent, yes, without meaning. I'm afraid not. The shape of a shape of a shape of a face, disassembling right before my eyes. What wail embattled break, like a hawk. I should be dead. Why am I still here? Wow. H.P. Lovecraft and Daniel Lusky are fantastic for allowing your imagination to fill in a lot of these holes and make it truly terrifying, because they recognize that fear has a lot to do with a loss of control. Insanity, just real creeping madness, is really the ultimate fear. So your imagination can bring you to these dark places, but I like to think of an imagination as being more like a lawnmower. It needs a good priming before it'll start. What can you do to infect you, just give you this nervousness, this sense of horror, and really let the subtleties, the negative spaces creep out? There's ways, and that's what makes you a great writer, to look for them. I will say the scariest book I ever read. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Scholastic Book Fair, you gave me nightmares.